I'm Hugh Hewitt. On June 18th, at a Hillsdale College online symposium, Heather MacDonald gave some remarks which have now appeared in the imprimis publication of the Hillsdale College monthly newsletter. Heather is an old friend. She is also the Thomas W. Smith Fellow at the Manhattan Institute, a contributing editor at the City Journal, and author of the best-selling War on the Cops and the Diversity Delusion. She joined me from California early this morning. Hello, Heather. Welcome to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Well, thanks for having me on, Hugh. It's great to be with you again.
I am going to read the first couple of lines of your speech. Over the last 4 months, Americans have lived through what is arguably the most consequential period of government malfeasance in U.S. history. Public officials' overreaction to the novel coronavirus put American cities into a coma. Those same officials' passivity in the face of widespread rioting threatens to deliver the coup de grace. Together, these back-to-back governmental failures will transform the American polity and cripple urban life for decades. It goes on at length, Heather. It has gotten extraordinary reaction. I just tweeted it out. It's already getting extraordinary reaction again. People don't know about it. Why the surprise at your noting the obvious?
I don't know, Hugh. We've been sleepwalking through disaster, and every single day, I wonder when the system is going to collapse completely. I think that Americans have been brainwashed into a state of fear. They are lying down the most destructive set of government actions, I think, in U.S. history. The grotesquely unnecessary, across-the-board economic shutdowns, and then the government's malfeasance in the face of the rioting and the ongoing destruction of civil peace. And I don't know. It's a very strange moment between.
How much time do you spend thinking about root causes of the public policy choices that are made here, Heather?
I spend more time worrying about the future and when we will ever get American prosperity back. But I think the root causes come out of the university, the safetyism ethic, the feminization of university culture is now translated itself into this civilization-destroying mantra of stay safe. I cringe every time I hear that. That is not how a vital culture thinks about things. At some point, we need a politician to stand up and say, there is death. Death is a fact of life. There are going to be some deaths from coronavirus as there are from other things, but there is much more death and destruction being wrought right now by this heartbreaking crushing of private enterprise, of hopes, of dreams, of future generations' opportunity, and staying safe, avoiding one type of risk to the ignorance of all other costs is not what we have elected our government officials to do. They have abdicated their responsibility to weigh the costs and benefits of any given action. They have put themselves in the hands of an extremely narrow set of experts whose own expertise changes by the day. And Americans have to wake up and start demanding change because we are really, really playing not just with the lives of people now who are out of work and whose efforts to create businesses have now been snuffed out completely, but we are playing with our children's lives because, again, prosperity is not coming back the longer these lockdowns continue.
Heather, I worry about a couple of things in particular. I worry about the age cohort of young people who are on the brink of learning to read, and that typically occurs in first grade to second grade. If you take them out of that cohort where they learn to read in order to be able to read to learn, I don't know that they ever catch back up in any serious way. I think a year and a half away from primary education at the early age is something we actually haven't seen in centuries. What do you think the effects of that will be?
It will be crippling to opportunity. The achievement gap is going to grow further, which means that racial tensions will grow. We are going to have a generation that is incapable of participating in the economy. It is absolutely horrifying. The key is being able to read. The key is not going to college. The key is, as you say, Hugh, those early years. And it's both the question of learning to read. It's also socialization. Who knows what attitudes towards human contact are being formed now in children? But without those basic skills, people are going to be handicapped for life. It's going to hurt them, and it's going to hurt everybody around them.
And this is in the face of overwhelming evidence that children in that age demographic are at almost no risk. And you said earlier, our inability to appreciate risk is what is driving this crisis. Can you expand on that? Bill Bennett makes the same argument as well. We've lost the ability to appreciate risk. What does that mean for just daily life?
Well, if we live this with all aspects of our life, nobody would get on a highway. There's at least 40,000 highway deaths a year, and Americans take the same attitude of that they value apparently their convenience and ability to get to someplace quickly ahead of the possibility that they will die. You balance cost and risk. If we said what Trump, alas, echoed what Andrew Cuomo said, which is saving one life is worth everything, then we would never have a bridge built. We would never have a mine built. We would have no construction whatsoever, because it is a statistical certainty that any type of large public contract is going to involve some loss of life. But there is an ability, we ought to have an ability to say there are certain human goods that are worth it. And you have to look at the big picture. And right now, for whatever reason, and I'm reluctant to embrace conspiracy theories, but at this point, it certainly does look like a certain set of politicians have a fundamental, not just misunderstanding of the complexity and beauty and grandeur of private enterprise and market activity, but they are actively hostile to it, and they believe that government is an active substitute for it. And they are shutting down private economic activity in order to avoid one particular risk whose actual lethality is highly circumscribed to people that are very old. The author of the infamous Imperial College model that predicted 2.2 million American deaths if government didn't take strong action, he actually, a few weeks later, admitted that 2/3 of coronavirus deaths would have died this year anyway of their existing comorbidities. Now, that's not to say that any grandmother's death is not a tragedy to that family, but we are putting ourselves into a economic and spiritual and social coma in order to prolong the inevitable for a very small set that could be protected without shutting everybody else down. I have never seen anything like this, and there should be enormous consequences in the ballot box this November.
Now, I want to talk about sunk costs for a minute, Heather, because I believe that is now what is perverting American public policy. And we know about sunk costs. We know we should walk away from them, but inevitably we don't. When do sunk costs become so obvious in the course of the 5 months that we've been dealing with this that we do declare an amnesty for all of the bad decision makers and all of the terrible commentary and all of the overheated projection, and for the Imperial College and for every broadcaster who has avoided reality? When do we declare amnesty and just beg people to start over the right way?
That would be wonderful, Hugh. That is the most optimistic thing I've heard in a long time. Ain't going to happen. At this point, so many politicians are wedded to the stay safe mentality. It is paternalistic. It is clear. You know, I predicted this months ago that they would create the second wave hysteria by counting cases, not counting deaths. That's what we're getting. We're still getting the headlines in the Los Angeles Times and New York Times. Dire straits. Even as not just deaths are going down, but cases are going down. We hear about outbreaks. The readers will read about an outbreak in Montana. What you will never get is the numbers. That outbreak in Montana consisted of 4 cases over 0. So it's a 400% increase. The press is absolutely wedded to this narrative. The politicians are as well, because it gives them power. And the outdoor mask mandate drives me insane. Outdoor transmission is virtually impossible. The reason we are all out there wearing outdoor masks at the risk of getting screamed at or arrested is because we have been transformed into agents of the state. Our bodies are visible billboards of fear. Everybody around wearing an outdoor mask is telling everybody else that outdoors is you are at risk of death by stepping outside, which is the exact opposite. If our public health officials, our media, and our politicians were dedicated to the truth, what they would be telling people is get outside, take off your mask, get exercise. It's the safest place you can possibly be. You do not need to wear a mask outdoors unless we want to convert you into walking agents of fear and hysteria.
Now, Heather, deep in the American DNA, which de Tocqueville observed 200 years ago, the happiest person he saw was an American with an axe over his shoulder, with a wagon and his wife and a child or two and a horse or a mule heading into the wilderness with no guarantee of anything, but whistling. That's deep in the American DNA. Do you think that's gone?
It looks like it. It looks like it. We did have those very heartening protests early on against the lockdowns. They were mocked. The entire elite treated these people as yahoos. Of course, we've seen the hypocrisy of the public health establishment cheering on the riots and the violent protests. And then those ended. We go right back to the mask mandates. It's unbelievable what they've gotten away with. But I do not see enough protests. I don't. It is very concerning. And part of it, as I say, is this university culture where the idea that you need safe spaces in a university against racism and sexism, and speech can hurt you and put you at harm at lethal risk of your life. That delusional idea of danger and risk, and the elevation of a phantom idea of safety that's come out of the university and has transformed our bureaucracies, our governments, that seems to now be very, very widespread. I hope you're right, Hugh. And obviously there's parts of the country this is somewhat sectional. It's remarkable to see the blue state, red state distinction instantiated to a large degree here. But even some of the red states that have been put sort of back into lockdown seem to be taking this lying down. My heart breaks for these business owners. My heart breaks for them. Nobody understands the courage that it takes to try and master supply chains, to start from nothing, to risk your pride, to sit there with a business hoping for customers to come in, and for government to shut them down without any knowledge of whether they are actually at risk of infecting people. And of course, the people they will affect have, if they're in anything other than a, say, plus 75 age limit, have virtually no risk of dying. To shut those businesses down is an act of utter cruelty and, in even worse, barbaric ignorance.
Heather, I want to close by talking about your other specialty, which is the police. The Wall Street Journal, on the morning we were speaking, has an editorial which shows a 122% year over year increase in the purchase of firearms, 40% of which are going to people who have never previously owned a gun. This is a hard data set, and it reflects what we see. How do you interpret what is a massive expansion of the gun-owning population?
The government has fallen down on its most basic obligations in the last 4 months. During the riots, it fell down on its obligation to keep the peace, protect property, protect life. That is, if government can't do that, you might as well disband it. There's no point. All it is writing ridiculous regulations. So we're moving into a vigilante state now where people are taking their own safety into their own hands. But that means that we are losing trust. You cannot have cities, as I say, the coronavirus lockdowns were a Cold War on cities. The riots and the government failure were a hot war. There is a flight, a white flight, a bourgeois flight from cities that is unbelievable. Every day in New York City, the moving vans are leaving in whole caravans, people getting out because they cannot trust their government any longer to preserve their basic right to walk the streets without having to worry about getting shot in some insane drive-by shooting.
So do you have a prediction on the political consequences of all this rather significant and sudden change in November?
I don't. I cannot tell if how large that silent majority is. I hope it is very large, and I hope it is not speaking its mind to pollsters, because I can just tell you, and I hate to get into partisan politics here, but if the Democrats take over Washington, we are going to get a war on the cops that we haven't even seen yet. We are going to get a demoralization of our nation's police. We are going to get crime even going through the roof even faster than it has been in these last 2 months. And we are going to get a decimation of our economic prosperity even further. So people have to understand that their lives really are at stake at this point. I don't want to sound apocalyptic, but I do think that it feels like we're in a house that termites are eaten away completely from the foundations, and we all think it's standing, and any minute it's going to collapse.
I want to tell people I've known Heather for almost 40 years. She is not a pessimist. She is not an apocalyptic thinker. What she is data driven, as is the Manhattan Institute. And I urge you to go and read her Imprimis article. You can get it at hillsdale.edu, or you can go to the Manhattan Institute. Heather, thank you for getting up early with me and sharing this at length. I appreciate it very much.
My pleasure, Hugh. Thank you so much.